You've probably been saying to yourself for a very long time that you will not be able to save money until you make more money. Sounds logical, but it's wrong. What if I told you that saving money has more to do with psychology and just a little bit of structure and less to do with how much you actually take home every month?
High costs on everyday essentials. A lot of people are finding it's difficult to save.
Exactly. It's leading people to living paycheck to paycheck with no safety net for those unexpected expenses.
Housing costs are high, wage growth is stagnant, debt levels are high, and for many people, they're finding it almost impossible to set aside a little extra for savings. So that means they could be in financial trouble when something unexpected happens. Studies show 1 in 4 Americans have no emergency savings at all.
A large percentage of Americans have no savings at all, and that's a concern because without savings, if there are financial challenges that happen, and they always do, it can make it very difficult to recover or to cover those expenses.
New government data shows Americans are saving less of their income than at any other time in the last 4 years. The personal savings rate dropped sharply to 2.6% in April. 1 year ago, it was twice that high.
Okay, before we actually go into this, I want to just give a little small caveat. In this video, I really do consider nuances, right? And we'll get to that. But before we go any further, I just want to make it very clear that I am not speaking to the person who genuinely cannot save a dime because they're actually genuinely struggling to meet their basic needs. That's not who I'm talking to. I'm talking to the person that knows they can save. Yes, you. But puts it off, delays it, and even tries to lie to themselves internally and say that they'll do it when they get more money. That's who I'm talking to. Because the person that is struggling to actually provide for their basic needs has way more to think about and has way more to be concerned about than optimizing their savings. Okay, now let's really go. I'm sure you might have said it yourself or heard other people say that when I get rich, when I get a promotion, when I start earning 6 figures, that is when I will save. If we think about charity and giving, right? We also hear the same thing. When I'm rich, that's when I'll start giving. Or I need to just be a millionaire so that I can start giving to charity and start helping the poor. You can help the poor today. It's always when I get X, that's when I will do Y. The outcome, so Y, is always determined and dependent on X, the input. But the funny thing about savings is that it's actually a habit that is built over time. It's habitual. It doesn't really care about how much you're bringing in, if you've got more, if you've got less than you had once. It's really about just keeping that habit going over a long period of time. But the funny thing about delaying and the funny thing about saying later this, later that, is that later has a very good habit itself of never actually arriving. And there's some psychology to it. Saying that you'll do something later is a lot more comfortable than confronting the fact that you can do it now, but you're just choosing not to do it. It sounds a lot better to say, when I get this thing, I'll definitely do that other thing, because it still allows your mind to believe that you're going to do it, but it's just that the conditions right now aren't perfect to actually do that thing. It kind of gives us this sort of psychological safety, I'm gonna say, because we're able to continue living exactly as we are now with no changes whatsoever, but be comforted to an extent that one day in our imagination at some point things are going to change. It allows us to avoid making any uncomfortable decisions today. And I just think it's quite funny because all of these things that we say we're going to do, so for example in this context, saving, all of those things actually start before you start earning 6 figures. They are habitual, they are habits, they start now. You exercise that muscle and it remains consistent and it keeps growing and it sort of snowballs as you get richer, as you acquire more money in the future. And it's also quite interesting because this line of thinking also assumes that saving some money, etc., are all outcomes of success. But when we think about saving a little bit more, so for example, saving money that you can put to investments, it's actually these habits that help people build and create success along the way. So let's take the charity example again. So the assumption is once you are really, really rich, that's when you'll start to give to charity. But if you've gone your whole life, let's say you've gone like 40 years without giving a dime to charity or anything like that, what makes you think that when you have lots of money, one of your first instincts is going to be to give. That's not what you're familiar with. That's not a routine or a habit that you've built. So I think that would actually be quite random to do. And the act of doing that easily and consistently, and when I say doing it easily, I mean without much friction, you're just able to just give out 10% or 20%, whatever it is. And when I say doing it consistently, I mean doing it every single month or every single week, frequently, basically. It's going to be very difficult if you've never done it before, and the same is true for savings. If you can't manage saving a small sum of money per month, then it's going to be very hard and very unlikely that you'll be able to save greater sums in the future. You won't be able to do it easily because it's going to be like this new thing that is going to have some mental friction when you first start, and you're also unlikely to do it consistently because it's not a habit or a routine that you've built. It's going to be quite shocking, and you might actually retreat and stop doing it completely. I remember there was a point in my early 20s where I wasn't making much money at all. I was making like £500 a month straight out of uni in the pandemic. That is literally the point when I started to learn about the arts of saving, and I would save 10% every single month, and that was £50. And then I also reserved a portion of my money that I was getting to giving as well. And I was left with like £380 a month to myself. But building that habit when I only had £500 a month coming in helped me to continue saving 10% of my salary every single month. And it was 10x. I went from £500 a month to £5,000 a month. But still, I was able to save 10%. And it's funny, my entire monthly salary actually became my 10% of savings. So that £500 actually ended up being how much I was having to save when I was making £5,000 a month. So if I just jumped into, you know, making £5,000 a month and I had never saved before, it would be nearly impossible for someone to convince me that I now need to give £500 away. But building that consistent habit early on allowed me to not even second guess it. There was a formula. It was to save 10%, and I did exactly that. And I've done that I'm now 27. I've done that throughout my 20s, and I have had salaries higher than what I have now. I've had salaries lower than what I've had now. So I've gone up and down, but still maintaining that same idea that saving 10%, that's what we do. So my question is, if you can't manage now with the salary you've got, what makes you think that in the future you're going to be able to manage that as well? When most of money, finance, dealing with money is psychological more than it is spreadsheets and structure. One of my absolute favorite finance books is this book. It's called The Psychology of Money. So Morgan talks about the fact that you can build wealth without a high income, but you have no chance of building wealth without a high savings rate. And he talks about how one of the most powerful ways to increase your savings isn't actually to raise your income. It's actually to raise your humility, because he argues people with enduring personal finance success, not necessarily high incomes, tend to have a propensity to not care about what other people think about them. So, whilst I understand that you cannot save yourself to wealth and save yourself to success, and there comes a point where you just need to earn more money, that's true. That is not what this video is about. It's not about saving yourself to wealth. No, it's about just building that habit of saving to start with and getting over this lie that you keep telling yourself that you'll only be able to save once you get to a certain point. You can do it now. You're probably used to a lot of financial advice that is pretty objective. It tells you to follow a particular formula, download this particular spreadsheet and use that. But one thing that they're really good at doing is ignoring nuances, subjectivity, and the fact that a lot of finance isn't actually really rational. It's more about being reasonable. For example, you might go online and find the 50-30-20 formula, right? This is like one of the most popular budgeting formulas, and it says what it advises for everyone that earns a salary and takes some money home is that 50% should be spent on providing for your basic needs. So your food, your house, your car, all of those essential things and those necessities that you need to live. And then 30% should go to your wants. So the things that you kind of desire for and you like to do. So that can be holidays, it can be entertainment, subscriptions, all of that jazz. And then 20% of your salary should go towards a saving. So that is the structure that is typically requested. And If I wanted to make this video easy and simple, I would just come on and give you that formula and shut my laptop and just be done. And in fact, someone might actually hear this formula and literally shut their laptop and be done, because maybe that's all they needed to hear. Maybe all they needed was a structure. However, I like to argue that there are some nuances with these objective formulas that are created that obviously don't take into account nuances in people's actual living situations. I have not considered the fact that Suzanne, who is on 35k, somehow still needs to live in London whilst using that formula. Or that John, who is on 50k, needs to live but then also has a really sick mother who depends on him financially. Or we take Sandra, who is on 6 figures, however, is in absolutely crippling debt and has dependents that she has to look after. So I think whilst it's probably a good framework, the 50, 30, 20, or something to maybe get your juices flowing and start thinking about how you should save, I don't think it's a copy and paste formula that should be, or even not that it should be, but can be applied to everyone. That girl who is on 30k living in London is 50%, dedicating 50% of her salary going to cut it whilst living in London. Is she going to have the leeway and the flexibility to dedicate 30% on her wants? And what about that guy that's on 50k? But looking after his sick elderly mother? One can argue for sure that maybe because he's living at home, he doesn't have to spend as much as the woman that's on 30k living in London for their needs, right? But because he is looking after his sick elderly mother, maybe his needs bracket actually surpasses the woman that's living in London for 30k. Who knows? Can he still talk about saving 20% of his salary or dedicating 30% to his wants? And I say all of that to say that the rule is still, yes, to save money, but to save money in a reasonable way, a way that works for you, a way that is applied and personalized and unique to you and your situation. And another thing is that the amount that you save needs to be sustainable as well. So you kind of need to also be comfortable with it, because if we take the fact that someone watches this video and then all of a sudden they want to go and save 20% or even 30% of their salary because they can, whilst that's great, let's say 20% of their salary is £500. Going from saving £0 every single month for maybe like 10 years to now saving £500 a month might cause some mental friction. She might actually give up after month 2 because she just finds that this is just way too much money. She's never had to dedicate £500 of her salary monthly, and now it just looks like too much of a hole in her finances, and then she reverts completely back to never saving ever again. And that's not what we want. We want it to be sustainable. We want it to be consistent so that it can start snowballing in the future. So maybe what you might say is, as opposed to saving 20%, maybe start with 10%. Or instead of 10%, maybe start with 5%, and just find a figure for you that works, that you can do every single month without breaking the bank, without neglecting your responsibilities, and something that doesn't make it too difficult for you to do consistently. And once you've been consistent with that particular sum, of course you can increase it, because you've built that habit and you've become a lot more comfortable with saving that amount. Because for me, the question is always going to be, what's the point of following 50, 30, 20, so that formula, if you're only going to do it for 2 months and then retreat because it's just too much? Start somewhere you can continue on. I remember actually encouraging a friend to start saving, and the amount I told her to save was just quite a lot for her at the time, but she thought, let's go, let's do it. And then after a couple of months, she completely retreated because she just found it was just too much. So set an amount that is reasonable to your situation, considering all of the things and nuances that go on in your life and your finances, and then find an amount also that you're just comfortable with starting off with, because the main thing here is really just about building that muscle. A lot of people also think first about saving it in places that don't make sense or where nothing really happens, and that's why they kind of think like, why am I doing this? We have a school of thought, we have a group of people that believe saving money under the bed makes the most sense. Please stop. Some people just keep some money in their current account, which they'll say they'll just won't touch. Please stop. And then we also have some people that save money in just a basic savings account, which is better, but still not perfect just yet. And whilst obviously I'm joking, there's no perfect route to do this, but there is actually a route where you can save money and also actually just be rewarded for saving that money. And that's where we start to introduce and think about high yield savings accounts. All a high yield savings account really is just a normal savings account where you deposit money into, but it actually offers you a higher rate of interest than a standard basic normal savings account. And this is actually really important because of inflation. If you put your money under your bed or you put it in like a basic savings account that doesn't have a high interest rate, for example, what is happening is that your money is just losing its value over time. That £10 that you put under your bed that you have today won't be able to buy you the same stuff that it does today in the future. And that's just because of inflation. So as prices go up, the purchasing power of the money you have now will go down. But you can circumvent this slightly, and a key way to try and combat this is to actually put your money in a high yield savings account. Now, does it mean or does it guarantee that having a high yield savings account will allow you to beat inflation? Who knows? It depends. It depends the interest rate that your bank is offering and also what the inflation rate is. Rate of inflation is 2.8%. If your high yield savings account offers an interest rate of, let's say, 3.8%, your money is technically growing and there's a real return of 1%. So the difference between the inflation rate, which was, well, today in the UK is 2.8%, and the interest rate that your bank is offering, which is 3.8%. So it's not necessarily that you're going to build wealth off of high yield savings accounts, but it helps when you start to think about purchasing power. I like high yield savings accounts, and I would most definitely encourage anyone that is looking to save money, which is the point of this video, to save that money in a way that you're not losing the value of your money every single year. If you have £10,000 sitting in a high yield savings account, and let's say the high yield savings account has an interest rate of 4%, that would mean that before you pay any taxes, after a year, you would have made £400. It's just by putting your money somewhere where it's actually just going to grow. So an extra £400 never hurt nobody. So for example, with myself, I took my personal finance journey seriously when I was about 22, 23, and it's been 4 years since then now. And what I started with, so the high yield savings accounts I started with was a First Direct one, and it had an interest rate of 7.5%. I think it was either 7 or 7.5%. And then I also had Halifax one that had an interest rate of 5%, a Club Lloyd's one as well that had an interest rate of 6%, and then my final one was a bank called Tandem, and I think it was around the 4.5% mark as well. A typical rate for a good high yield savings account is about 4 to 5%, but you can get some like First Direct, like Club Lloyd's, where they're looking at around 6 to 7%, which is really good. There are also some other things to consider about high yield savings accounts as well before you go into it. So firstly, a lot of them require a minimum deposit monthly, and they also might require a maximum, or most of the time, a maximum deposit monthly as well. So for example, with my First Direct account, that required you to deposit a maximum of £300 a month. You could not exceed depositing £300 a month. And my Halifax one was £250 a month, and I think my Club Lloyd's one was also around £250 to £300. And that was quite annoying because at the time I wanted to put as much money into my different savings accounts, but my First Direct had a maximum of £300. So a way that you can circumvent this issue is just doing what I did, which is just setting up various different high yield savings accounts. There are also fixed and variable rates as well. So some banks will have a fixed rate. So for example, like First Direct, they had a fixed rate of 7%. So that was the interest rate, and that was completely fixed. That was not going to change for that 1 year term. But then you'll have other ones, for example, like my Tandem account, where it was variable. So for example, it can say 7% today, but it can go down to 4% tomorrow. It's variable, it's not fixed. And what you'll find typically with the fixed high yield savings accounts, they're also a lot stricter. So they'll require you potentially to deposit money every single month for a particular term. So it can be 1 year, it can be 2 years. And also another strict term that's typically there is that you cannot remove any money from that bank account moving forwards. From the day that you sign on the dotted line, you cannot remove that money. And if you do remove that money, then you will have to forfeit the interest rate that was going to be favorable at the end of the term. So with those fixed ones, you have to be very strict with yourself, and that you will commit that you're going to deposit some money every single month for the duration of that term, if you actually want to benefit from the interest rate. I guess it's still up to you. You can remove the money if you want halfway through the term, but just remember that you're not going to benefit from that interest rate if that is what the bank has set. There are also some other ones that are a bit stricter where you actually can't remove the money at all. And you'll have to submit like a letter or call them to justify the reason why you want to remove this money that you've already deposited. So have a look at whether you want to do a variable rate or whether you're looking for a fixed rate. The fixed rates are obviously always a bit more favorable in terms of the number that it gives. So for example, First Direct's 7%. So typically they're not as strict. You can deposit money in, you can take money out whenever you want. And I would always recommend those sorts of banks or bank accounts rather, for an emergency fund. So it's still a high yield savings account, but if you are in an emergency, which is the point of the account, you can literally remove that money and spend it on whatever you need. Whereas if it was my First Direct, if I had an emergency and I couldn't touch that money, what am I going to do? So that's why having those high yield savings accounts that allow you to remove money are going to be really helpful for your emergency fund. But just to note that typically they are going to be or have a variable rate as opposed to a fixed rate. And this is why I said that yes, saving money is great, but what about saving and making? So essentially being rewarded for saving money. They will reward you and give you money for actually sticking to the plan. Once you've tackled savings, you may want to start dibbling and dabbling in investing and learn more about it. And if that's the case, I'm sure you have always heard or always hear about the S&P 500. If that's the case, you will really love this video I've done here, all about the S&P 500 and things I really wish I knew at the start of my journey. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in my next video. Mwah.